Hello everybody, my name is Walter and this is the fourth episode of my Redstone Commands Series. In this episode I want to cover a fundamental part of many commands, which are coordinates. Now, Minecraft comes with 3 different coordinate systems you can use in commands, and knowing how to use them properly can be quite important if you want to use your commands efficiently. Subsequently, I decided to make this its own episode, even if it will be a bit shorter. And with that, let's get actually started. So, first things first, when you are describing the position of a block or an entity using commands, what you are actually describing is just a single point in the world. This, what I like to call center of mass, is different located in the actual volume of the block or the entity, depending on whether you're looking at a block or an entity. Subsequently, if you want to have everything properly aligned when you're working with both, you need to know the differences. So for blocks, it's the corner with the lowest possible coordinates, which is the lower northeast corner. So if you look in the F3 menu, you will see here, west is negative x, down is obviously negative y, and north is negative z. So subsequently, lower northeast corner is the corner with the lowest coordinates. For entities, it's the bottom center of the hitbox of that entity. So for players, for example, it's right between the feet, or at the bottom of the feet, and for this board here would also be in the middle and then at the bottom, and so on and so on. The executor of a command determines the position the commands will default to. This is important if you're using relative coordinates or if the coordinates are, for example, optional and the command will usually default to the position of the player or of the executor of the command or similar. This is the default. So if you are executing a command, for example, by inserting it into the chat window or you activate a command block, it will either default to right between your feet as the starting point, or for a command block, it would be the position of the command block. Remember, position of the command block is the lower northeast corner. You can change that using the execute command, the execute at command to be more precise, but I will talk about this in a later episode in more detail. And with that, let's start with the absolute world coordinates. Those are the pure X, Y, Z coordinates you can see, for example, in the F3 menu if you look at the block. And then you can see here the triplet of coordinates X, Y, and Z of the block you're looking at. On the other hand, you can also see, for example, your own coordinates here, which would be X, Y, and Z. You can also see already the difference. Blocks have whole numbers, while, well, entities like, for example, the player usually have decimal numbers in there. X, as I have already shown a bit earlier, basically is the east coordinate, Y is the up coordinate, and Z is the south coordinate. As a reference point, Y36 is the normal sea level in a normal generated world. Y is also limited, contrarily to the X and Z coordinates, between 0 and 255 if you are before 1.18, or after 1.18 between -64 to 320. As I have already shown you, if you're looking at the block and you want to know the coordinates, just use the F3 menu. If you want to know the coordinates of an entity, this can be a bit more tricky because, as you can see here, it's not displayed anywhere in the F3 menu, but you can use the data get command. So just type in data get entity, and then you will, if you're looking at that entity, get the actual Minecraft internal name for that entity. And then you will see the whole load of NBT data, and somewhere in here you usually have some position or pos, which is again a triplet of, in this case, double, so floating point numbers, which make the coordinates for that. Again, X, Y, and Z. More about this in a later episode when I talk about NBT data. So, those are the absolute coordinates. Just as an example here, I have a command which will summon in well, you will see what it will summon in. So as you can see, this little cloud here, and I decided to go with absolute coordinates, which you can see, is essentially the coordinates of the target block, with the main difference being that I decided to add 0.5 to the x and z coordinate. So z coordinate and x coordinate, you can see minus 14 plus 0.5 max 13.5 minus, and this plus 0.5 make this here. And I also decided to go 1.5 up, so I have a floating cloud of that smoke there. Interesting enough, if you don't give it decimal numbers, but pure whole numbers, it will automatically add the 0.5 when you're working with certain commands like the summon command or the teleport command. So it will actually default to the center of the block you are actually addressing. This is quite useful, but it can also be a bit of a surprise, because if you actually want to hit a corner, you will have to add the 0.0 to actually hit that corner. So that's something to be aware of, which can be a bit surprising there. Next, we have the relative world coordinates, which are the tilde notation I use quite commonly in commands. By the way, if you don't know what the tilde is, it's this little squiggle there, and usually you find it in a trifecta like this here, with maybe some numbers thrown in to give relative coordinates actually. So if you want to go in a negative direction, you have to add minus. If you want to go in a plus direction, you don't need to add a minus, just add a number. As the name implies, the relative world coordinates use the same directions or the same grid, effectively, as the absolute coordinates, but with a different origin of that coordinate grid. For absolute coordinates, you have a 0.000, and that's used for all absolute coordinates independent of where in the world you are. For relative coordinates, it uses the origin of the command execution. So for example, if I execute a command, it's the center of my feet. If a command block executes, it's its lower northeast corner again, and so on and so on. So just to give you an example, I'm again summoning in a little dust endeavor, and in this case I'm summoning in going 3 in the west direction. And to make it a bit more interesting, I'm using the execute command to actually execute it at my position. So I'm not going 3 meters west from the, or east from the block here, but from me. And you can see this little dust cloud here is following me now. And you can already see using execute commands makes this a very, very powerful tool. Now, what is even more interesting is that you can freely mix relative and absolute world coordinates. Since they use the same grid or directions, there is no issue with that. And here, for example, I'm summoning in at effectively my position in the x and the z coordinate, but a fixed y coordinate of 7t. So what does this mean? Well, now I have a dust devil that, well, when I'm standing here is just at eye level, but if I go up, it starts to follow me, but doesn't change in height. So you can easily mix and match the different coordinate systems when it comes to world coordinates, which makes this even more powerful. And that brings me to the last coordinate system, which are local coordinates or body coordinates. They are accessed using the carré notation. Now the carré is this little roof there. They are used the same as the tilde notation. If you want to go in a negative direction, just add minus and the number. If you want to go in a positive direction, just add the number. No plus here, this will cause an error message, just a number. They are somewhat similar to relative coordinate systems or relative world coordinates insofar that they originate from the command executor. The main difference is they don't use the world grid coordinate system. They use a coordinate system that is relative to the viewing angle or viewing axis of the one who is executing it. In that coordinate system, x means towards the left, y means towards up, and z means forward. So as an example here, I'm again summoning a bit of a dust cloud. Again, I'm effectively executing it myself. And in this case, I'm going neither left nor right. I'm going 1.5 up, which means it's basically at eye level. Remember, it starts at the level of my feet. And then I'm going 3 towards the front. And if I execute that, you can see now I have a dust cloud that is always within my center view and follows me around. Now this can be very powerful. For example, if you use an Armorstand that looks in a certain direction and always teleports a bit forward, you can use that, for example, to search for a block. And once it hits a block, you can replace that block with another block, for example. That's what I did in my brush data pack. So you can do quite a few interesting things with that. Now the main limitation of that is, since it uses a different grid than the world grid, you can't mix it with world coordinates, independent whether they are absolute or relative world coordinates. That's the main limitation here. If a command block is executing a command with a carré notation and it's not using the execute command to actually shift that to another entity, the carré notation is actually the same as the tilde notation, with the only real disadvantage that you can't actually mix it with absolute world coordinates. So when you're just using command blocks without the execute command onto an entity, use the tilde notation. It's much, much better in this case. And that brings me to the last thing I want to mention, and that is if you click on the F3 and the B key, you will see that it will activate the hitboxes. And you can also see the view axis of the entities. So that here would be, concerning this Armorstand here, effectively plus Z. Or this would be plus Z for the boat here. Similarly, you can see if you throw an item on the floor, it also has a certain view angle, which is a bit randomized, so yeah, you get the idea. Now that I'm a subject of an Armorstand, there is, well, I consider it a bug, at least at the moment. You can see this here is nicely looking in the direction it's facing, but actually, if you just place it down, it will always look roughly south, independent of where and how you place it. That's a bug I consider, and the only real way to fix that is overwriting the rotation. So let me quickly show you what I mean. With the data get command, you can actually get the NPT data. The data command will be covered in a later episode, but what you can see here is you have the rotation of the Armorstand in here. And we can override that notation, so we use again the data command. This time we make a merge entity, and now we override the rotation only. And now I basically write pretty much the same, just with some default values for the moment. And now I've changed that, and you can see it automatically changed the way the Armorstand looks like. And now if I change the rotation, for example, let's go with minus 45, which should now look upwards. As you can see, now this goes up. And if I want to change, for example, the orientation where it's looking at in the horizontal, you can see now it's looking in this direction. And finally, if I just make this a 0, it looks in the same direction as this one here. So this is a little bug you should be aware of when you're using Armorstands. You can either change it using the data command, or you can just summon it in the very beginning with the correct orientation, or you can teleport it on the position of another entity, which would then copy the orientation of that other entity. But more about this in later episodes. And with that, we have reached the end of this episode about coordinates. I hope you enjoyed this little episode, and well, see you.